The movie starts with a confusing scene. A man is holding two girls covered in blood, gently stroking their heads. The girl's father, seeing this, angrily punches the man many times. Then a policeman points a gun at the man's head and spits at him, thinking he's guilty. But actually, the man is trying to save the two children. Despite his efforts, he's wrongly convicted of murder and sentenced to death. This is a movie you have to see about finding redemption in life. Since it came out in 1999, it has got a really good rating of 8.9 from 300,000 viewers. It's considered one of the best prison-themed movies. The man's name is John Coffey. Before this happened, nobody knew who he was. When he first came to the prison, a guard named Percy Wetmore loudly announced that the death row inmate had arrived. The boss, Paul Edgecombe, got very nervous and acted fast. A really big man named John Coffey came in. He was twice as big as most people and seemed really upset. His eyes looked innocent and clear. Paul Edgecombe had to ask if something was wrong. John Coffey said, "Can you keep the lights on at night when I sleep? I'm scared of the dark, especially in a strange place." John Coffey seemed simple, like a kid, not mean at all. This made Paul Edgecombe curious, so he decided to check into John Coffey's past. He found out that John Coffey was accused of killing two young girls. When the girls' dad and the police got there, they found John Coffey holding the girls, crying and screaming. He said, "I tried to save them, but I did my best." Paul Edgecombe found it hard to believe. John Coffey seemed more like a kind giant than a mean killer. The case was done, and thinking about it more seemed like a waste of time. The next day, the guards got a message to collect a prisoner from the hospital. This prisoner seemed like he had a mental problem. He was always drooling, and he didn't answer when called. The guards had to help him get dressed and take him back to the prison. They were surprised when they opened the cell door because the prisoner smirked and suddenly attacked the guards. Paul Edgecombe saw a guard getting strangled by handcuffs, so he rushed to help but got kicked in the groin by Wild Bill Wharton. Luckily, another guard came just in time, attacked Wild Bill Wharton from behind and managed to control him. As people left, Paul Edgecombe felt overwhelmed and fell to the ground. He had been sick for many years. In the daytime, he suffered a lot to go to the bathroom, trying hard to pee. At night, pain woke him up and he rushed to the bathroom, squeezing his legs together. Sometimes he was in so much pain that he collapsed and had to go to the bathroom right there. The recent event had taken a toll on Paul Edgecombe. He felt pain all over his body and sweat formed on his forehead. Unexpectedly, John Coffey asked to see Paul Edgecombe. Out of respect for John, Paul tried hard to get up. Just when he was going to ask John Coffey what he needed, the light in the prison got brighter. There was a loud noise and John Coffey released him. Paul Edgecombe suddenly felt like the pain was gone. He stared at John Coffey in surprise, but John Coffey seemed to be in a lot of pain. John began to cough hard, and suddenly lots of lac bugs flew out of his mouth and vanished into the air. Paul Edgecombe stared in disbelief at the scene before him. He couldn't help but ask John Coffey what he had done. John Coffey wearily replied, "I cured your disease." Paul Edgecombe, feeling unbelievable relief, went to the bathroom. It was such a relief. It turns out that using the restroom could also be a pleasure. The divine power of John Coffey made Paul Edgecombe respect him even more. Could such a person really be a murderer? The next day, Paul Edgecombe found John Coffey's defense attorney. The lawyer said John Coffey was like a man who had dropped from the sky. No one knew his past, and he had no criminal record. To repay John Coffey, Paul Edgecombe brought him bread made by his wife. The kind-hearted John Coffey shared the bread with Edouard Delacroix, who was imprisoned across from him. This angered Wild Bill Wharton, who cursed at John Coffey. Paul Edgecombe stepped in to stop him, but Wild Bill Wharton spat directly at him. Paul Edgecombe never counts, but Wild Bill Wharton grows more and more arrogant, trying to humiliate the guards every time he checks on them. One day, as Percy Wetmore walked by, Wild Bill Wharton grabbed him and kissed his face, uttering obscenities. Percy Wetmore struggled in fear, and when Wild Bill Wharton let go, his pants were already half wet. On ordinary days, Percy Wetmore was always arrogant and domineering, bullying the prisoners in various ways. Now, seeing Percy Wetmore in such a sorry state, Edouard Delacroix couldn't help but burst into laughter. This was simply a great humiliation. With hatred in his heart, Percy Wetmore glared viciously at Edouard Delacroix, secretly vowing to make Edouard Delacroix's life a living hell one day. Edouard Delacroix had a small tame mouse that could perform various tricks. They were inseparable, sharing food and sleep. The mouse was his family, his spiritual solace. One day the mouse ran out of the cell, and Percy Wetmore saw an opportunity. He extended his foot and deliberately, accurately stepped on it. Edouard Delacroix screamed in sorrow, heartbroken. Everyone present was shocked. Everyone understood the significance of the mouse to Edouard Delacroix. except for Percy Wetmore, who casually walked away as if nothing had happened. As everyone lamented the fate of the mouse, a large black hand reached out. It was John Coffey. He instructed Paul Edgecombe to quickly hand the mouse to him. Perhaps there was still hope. Amidst the bewildered gazes of everyone present, John Coffey cupped the mouse in his hands, gently kissed it, and with a burst of light the mouse's tail twitched. A few seconds later, John Coffey opened his mouth in pain, and countless tiny black bugs flew out of his mouth, slowly disappearing into the air. The mouse appeared unharmed before everyone. A miracle had occurred, leaving everyone present stunned, unable to recover from the shock. Resurrected from the dead, it exceeded their understanding. After a long while, Paul Edgecombe, who had come to his senses along with the guards, found Percy Wetmore and threatened him to leave the prison. Such a malicious person didn't deserve to stay here. Percy Wetmore, however, said that he had come to the prison so that he could carry out an execution himself, and in order to get him out as quickly as possible, Paul Edgecombe agreed to. A few days later, Paul Edgecombe went to Edouard Delacroix's cell. Today was the day of Edouard Delacroix's execution, and what he couldn't let go of the most was the little mouse. To ease Edouard Delacroix's mind, Paul Edgecombe told him about a nearby mouse village, a famous tourist destination where mice not only had food and drink but also performed various tricks. Edouard Delacroix smiled happily after hearing this. He could finally leave without any worries. As the execution approached, Edouard Delacroix suddenly became uncontrollably sad. He said, "Don't forget about the mouse village." But Percy Wetmore replied, "There is no such place. They made it up to deceive you." With a heart full of malice, Percy Wetmore wanted Edouard Delacroix to die with regret. Seeing Edouard Delacroix's face filled with sadness and pain, Percy Wetmore happily had a hood placed over his head. Before an execution, a sponge needs to be wetted and placed on the prisoner's head to ensure that the electric current quickly passes through the body, shortening the execution time and significantly reducing the prisoner's pain. But Percy Wetmore didn't do this. To retaliate against Edouard Delacroix, he pretended to wet the sponge and placed it on Edouard Delacroix's head. As the switch was flipped, Edouard Delacroix's agonizing screams echoed through the prison. The smoke billowed violently from his head, making Paul Edgecombe realize that the sponge had been tampered with. If he pulled down the switch now, it would only make Edouard Delacroix suffer unbearably. He could only stand helplessly aside watching as Edouard Delacroix's body was slowly burned, enduring extreme pain. Soon the smell of burning flesh filled the air and people had never seen such a cruel scene, frightening them into fleeing. At this moment, John Coffey, who was helping with the mouse, suddenly began to tremble violently. His body soaked in sweat. He had the divine power to sense the pain of those around him, and Edouard Delacroix's pain was now being felt by John Coffey, trembling. John Coffey accidentally transmitted his divine power to the mouse in his hand. Feeling the pain of its owner, the mouse ran out of the prison as if insane. Seeing Edouard Delacroix burned, Percy Wetmore was indifferent, and even pretended not to know the sponge was supposed to be wet. One of the guards could no longer bear it and punched Percy Wetmore in the face later. Paul Edgecombe visited the prison to see the little mouse and John Coffey. John Coffey, with a heart full of sorrow, cried, "I'm so tired." Paul Edgecombe understood that the tiredness John Coffey spoke of was not physical, but the weariness of having a heart that wanted to save the world yet being powerless to do so. On a day off, Paul Edgecombe visited his friend's house with his wife. Learning that his friend's wife was suffering greatly from brain cancer and had little time left, Paul Edgecombe was deeply saddened. Returning home, he tossed and turned, a bold idea forming in his mind. He wanted John Coffey to use his divine power to save his friend's wife. The next night, Paul Edgecombe gathered his fellow guards and began a plan to escape. In order not to be discovered by outsiders, they first bewitched Wild Bill Wharton and then put Percy Wetmore in the brig in the name of punishment. However, just as they were about to take John Coffey out of the prison, Wild Bill Wharton, still under the influence of drugs, grabbed John Coffey's hand. John Coffey suddenly trembled as if sensing something, but time was running out. Paul Edgecombe pulled Wild Bill Wharton's hand away and led John Coffey out of the prison. Under the starry night sky, John Coffey wore a childlike smile. Taking advantage of the darkness, a group of people arrived at their friend's house, and their friend, awakened by the commotion, cautiously aimed a gun at John Coffey. Ignoring the threat, John Coffey walked straight into the bedroom, his extraordinary powers already sensing the pain of the woman. The woman's face was filled with weariness, and her sunken eyes revealed her deteriorating condition. However, as John Coffey sat beside her, the woman's emotions slowly stabilized. John Coffey kissed her and the light bulbs in the room became unusually bright while the pendulum clock downstairs stopped ticking. Another miracle occurred. The woman instantly regained her vitality, as if she had been reborn. Even the painful memories of her illness dissipated into thin air. Overwhelmed with joy, their friend wept tears of happiness and embraced his wife tightly. But this healing took a toll on John Coffey. Instead of expelling the dark insects as usual, he collapsed on the ground, coughing uncontrollably. At that moment, the woman noticed John Coffey. She suddenly felt like this person was a part of her life. With tears in her eyes, she took off her necklace and placed it around John Coffey's neck, hoping to bless him with safety. Soon after, the guards dragged the exhausted John Coffey back to the prison. Fearing suspicion, Paul Edgecombe quickly released Percy Wetmore. Percy Wetmore wore a gloomy expression, plotting his revenge. Suddenly, John Coffey grabbed Percy Wetmore's throat and the guards rushed to intervene. However, John Coffey opened his mouth wide and spat all the small dark insects into Percy Wetmore's mouth. When John Coffey released his grip, Percy Wetmore became vacant, moving forward without any reaction. Wild Bill Wharton, who had just woken up, saw Percy Wetmore walking by and began his usual routine of verbally insulting him. But this time, instead of wetting himself, Percy Wetmore drew his sidearm and started shooting wildly at Wild Bill Wharton. Caught off guard by this sudden action, the guards struggled to intervene. By the time they managed to wrestle the gun away from Percy Wetmore, Wild Bill Wharton was already dead. Pinned down by the guards, Percy Wetmore's stomach churned, and countless dark insects flew out of his mouth. Paul Edgecombe didn't understand why the kind-hearted angel, John Coffey, would do this. John Coffey said, "I punished them. I saw what they did." Without Paul Edgecombe's consent, John Coffey transferred his divine power, the ability to sense the pain of others, to Paul Edgecombe. In an instant, Paul Edgecombe saw the truth of the two little girls' deaths. It turned out that John Coffey was not the killer. The real culprit was Wild Bill Wharton. When John Coffey sensed the girls' pain and arrived at the scene, it was too late. He could only hold the girls helplessly in their pain. Watching this memory, Paul Edgecombe was in tears. John Coffey had a heart full of compassion, enduring the world's cries of pain. He was an angel sent by heaven, but now the angel was misunderstood by the world. The only comforting thing was that Wild Bill Wharton was shot dead, and Percy Wetmore was sent to a mental hospital due to insanity. The prison returned to its former state. Paul Edgecombe knew that John Coffey was innocent, but the real killer was dead. In a case with no evidence, even if he testified in court, the judge would not believe him. Paul Edgecombe felt deep regret but was powerless to change the situation. So he came to the prison to release John Coffey, but John Coffey refused. He said, "I'm tired. I need closure. I'm tired of the wandering life, lonely like a duckweed in the rain, tired of having no friends around, tired of hearing and feeling pain every day. And most of all, I'm tired of the ugly face of humanity, powerless." Paul Edgecombe could only respect John Coffey's choice and was willing to fulfill all his requests. John Coffey said his only wish was to watch a movie called Heaven. His wish was granted, and as the light from the projector passed over John Coffey's head, he looked at the screen with a long-lost smile, appearing like an angel. Soon, it was John Coffey's execution day. The guards arrived at the cell in full gear, each with a solemn face. But John Coffey was very calm. He smiled and reassured everyone not to worry as he would soon be released. Entering the execution chamber, John Coffey's mood suddenly became somewhat low. He said, "There are many people here who hate me. I can feel it." The guard said, "Try to feel our feelings. We don't hate you." The guard's love calmed John Coffey's heart once again as he calmly sat on the electric chair. The guards cried. Paul Edgecombe asked John Coffey if he wanted to say anything else. John Coffey said, "Please don't cover my head. I'm scared of the dark. Angels should be in the light." Paul Edgecombe agreed. When it was time for the electric shock, Paul Edgecombe couldn't give the order. He couldn't destroy God's creation, the angel who came to earth. Paul Edgecombe shook John Coffey's hand, feeling guilty and sad. John Coffey finally got the release he wanted. After that, Paul Edgecombe and the guards left the prison. Many years later, Paul Edgecombe watched the movie Heaven in a nursing home and cried. He told his old friend the story. The friend found it hard to believe. Paul Edgecombe took him to a cabin in the woods. He called, and a gray-haired mouse crawled out of a cigar box. It was the same mouse from years ago. When John Coffey gave his power to Paul Edgecombe and the mouse, they lived longer. Paul Edgecombe saw it as a blessing and a punishment. He witnessed many wonders but lost loved ones. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you on the next video.